autumn of 1944, American forces advancing through the forests of Western Europe encountered a tactical problem that Doctrine alone could not solve. Field manuals had been written with open terrain in mind. Visibility, distance, and clearly defined lines of advance formed the basis of how infantry units were supported and protected. In theory, designated marksmen operated several hundred yards behind advancing troops, providing overwatch across open ground. This video is presented for historical and educational purposes only. In dense forest, that theory collapsed. Here, visibility rarely exceeded 50 yards. Thick canopy disrupted sightlines. Undergrowth concealed movement until forces were already in close proximity. The forest floor, layered with decades of fallen leaves and debris, amplified sound and restricted mobility. In these conditions, positioning based on distance rather than observation offered little practical value. The tactical equation was simple. German defensive units established positions along the limited routes available for movement. Trails, narrow clearings, and natural corridors became predictable points of contact. American infantry advanced according to operational plans. By the time resistance was detected, units were already under pressure, and coordination became difficult. The system functioned efficiently, but not for the advancing force. German units had occupied this terrain for extended periods. They understood its structure and constraints. Defensive positions were selected deliberately, often covering multiple approaches simultaneously. These were not improvised setups, but carefully prepared locations designed to exploit limited visibility and predictable movement patterns. American responses followed established procedure: preparatory fire, followed by infantry movement to clear resistance. Then, continuation of the advance. While effective in open areas, this approach proved costly in forests where defenders controlled the timing and location of engagement. Losses accumulated steadily, not during major offensives, but through repeated disruptions along routine advances. Reports tracked these losses, but the underlying cause remained unresolved. The issue was not training, discipline, or morale. It was positioning. Designated marksmen were placed where Doctrine indicated they should be, not where terrain allowed them to influence events. Positioned far behind the lead elements, they were unable to observe enemy preparations or intervene before contact occurred. They provided security for movement they could not see and support against threats already underway. In some sectors, units experienced significant reductions in effective strength over a matter of weeks, not due to large-scale operations, but because predictable movement through restrictive terrain consistently favored prepared defenders. The forest itself had invalidated the assumptions embedded in Doctrine. A small number of soldiers began to reassess the problem from a different angle. Instead of asking where Doctrine placed them, they asked where they needed to be in order to observe and disrupt enemy preparation. The answer required abandoning conventional positioning. Rather than remaining behind advancing units, some designated marksmen began moving forward under cover of darkness. They infiltrated into areas the enemy already controlled, selecting concealed locations that overlooked likely approach routes and defensive preparation sites. This approach conflicted with established principles. Forward placement without immediate support increased risk. Extraction would be difficult or impossible. Coordination with friendly units became more complex. Official guidance emphasized integration, not isolation. But existing methods were producing consistent results, and those results were improvised. Natural depressions in the ground, fallen trees that blended into the forest floor, erosion features created by seasonal runoff. In several cases, abandoned agricultural structures or drainage features provided concealment without appearing artificial. The key was not construction, but selection. Forests contained countless features that appeared unchanged and unremarkable. By occupying them before defensive positions were established, observers could remain undetected while maintaining clear views of likely engagement areas. One soldier, who before the war had worked in industrial salvage, approached the terrain differently. Years of identifying usable components within disordered environments translated naturally to concealment selection. What others saw as uniform debris, he saw as functional structure. A collapsed foundation became stable cover. A rotting log provided a narrow observation channel. Features that looked unchanged for years attracted no attention and raised no suspicion. Operating this way demanded skills beyond formal training. Movement through controlled areas required extreme discipline. Remaining motionless for extended periods tested physical endurance and mental focus. Most importantly, it required accepting that detection meant isolation, with no immediate support available. The effectiveness of the method came not from advanced technology, but from unpredictability. German defensive procedures were optimized against known tactics. Likely, overwatch locations were monitored. Elevated ground and obvious cover were routinely checked. What could not be systematically controlled was the sheer volume of natural concealment available in forested terrain. As defensive preparations began to fail, coordination disrupted, warning systems delayed, positions abandoned prematurely, German reports noted increased precision observation activity. However, locating its source proved difficult. Positions were often discovered only after they had been vacated. Intelligence summaries from the period reflect growing frustration. Units were advised to conduct more thorough reconnaissance, to inspect potential concealment sites carefully, and to vary defensive routines. These recommendations were sound in theory, but impractical in execution. Comprehensive searches slowed operational tempo and required manpower that was already limited. Avoiding predictable locations meant abandoning carefully prepared positions. The introduction of uncertainty disrupted a system designed for efficiency. Within weeks, sectors employing forward observation techniques reported noticeable reductions in personnel losses during advances. Comparative analysis between sectors suggested that early disruption of defensive preparation significantly reduced the effectiveness of ambush tactics. Despite these results, institutional response remained cautious. Formally authorizing such methods would have required acknowledging that existing guidance was inadequate for certain environments. It would also raise questions about how far initiative should extend beyond written procedures. The solution was administrative rather than doctrinal. Units issued flexible operational guidance, allowing observation positions forward of friendly elements when terrain restricted conventional overwatch. The language was deliberate. It neither explicitly endorsed nor prohibited the practice. It allowed results without forcing revision. The technique spread informally through discussions between non-commissioned officers, through demonstrations conducted quietly before patrols, through after-action reports that emphasized outcomes while avoiding detailed descriptions of methods. Experience was passed person to person. Movement during darkness, allowing extra time for positioning. Selecting concealment that appeared natural rather than constructed. Establishing observation over approach routes rather than reacting to contact. Remaining motionless regardless of discomfort. By late 1944, the method was in regular use across multiple units, though rarely acknowledged directly. Reports described disrupted defenses, reduced losses, and improved advance coordination. Attribution was deliberately vague. Following the war, analytical studies examined the effectiveness of precision observers in restrictive terrain. Several noted that unconventional forward positioning had provided significant advantages under specific environmental conditions. Further study was recommended. Over time, those recommendations were incorporated. By the mid-20th century, training programs formally taught forward infiltration and hide site selection as standard practice. Manuals described principles that had once been improvised. Instructors demonstrated techniques refined through experience. What was not preserved was attribution. Official histories referenced tactical adaptation without detailing its origins. Innovations were described as the product of evolving doctrine rather than individual initiative. The institution absorbed the method while smoothing its history. The soldiers who first applied these techniques returned to civilian life. Some to industry, some to agriculture, some to construction. They carried no formal recognition for altering how observation was conducted in complex terrain. They had identified a problem, developed a solution under pressure, and demonstrated its effectiveness. The system adopted the result, not the story. This pattern is not unique. Military organizations adapt by absorbing what works, often without recording how or why change occurred. Doctrine evolves, but its origins are simplified. Innovation becomes anonymous. Today, forward observation in forested terrain is standard practice. Students learn concealment selection, movement discipline, and patience as foundational skills. They are taught methods proven decades earlier, refined through experience, and formalized through instruction. The effectiveness is no longer debated. Positioning observers where they can see preparation, rather than react to contact, reduces losses and improves coordination. The mathematics remain unchanged. What remains absent is memory. In the forests of Western Europe in 1944, doctrine failed to account for terrain. Individual soldiers recognized that reality and adapted accordingly. Their methods persist. Their names do not. The forest forced a change. The institution followed. And that is often how military adaptation truly occurs.